Good morning, everyone. Here we are in our last, probably what is our last week of finishing the race. But we never know because sometimes a coda gets added on to the race toward the end. So we'll see. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. We are your children, making our way through this world with the best that we know. We need your guidance every step of the way, your constant presence, showing us the difference between desire and dharma, between delusion and the path to freedom. And then once we know, we need your constant support and inspiration in order to make the right choices, joyously, freely, with complete understanding that you are with us. Om, peace. Amen. Well, my friends, we're in the last little part of what Swami called the life review. And then what comes after this is a series of very practical questions that people ask about the end of life. I'm going to have to clear my throat. Give me a moment here. I try to be like Swami in as many ways as I can, and I listened to 2 talks of him yesterday, constantly clearing his throat. But I'm not trying to imitate him. It's a pure coincidence. But it's some compensation. You always want to be that way. I remember when Swamiji was very sick in bed with the flu, and he was having some of us around just to pass the time, I was reading out loud to him from the novel The Robe. And alternately, we were admiring the story and criticizing the writing. But it was just a way to pass the time. And Shivani came in. And as she started to walk towards Swami to greet him, he said, keep back, I have the flu. She walked right up to him, took his hand, leaned over. If you have it, sir, I want it. That's what she said. And he was very sweet and well-intentioned, and he was very touched by her spirit. So no, I don't want to be coughing just because Swami was, but it's a little compensation. All right. Now these are the last points on which Swami spends less time than we did on all of these issues trying to extricate ourselves from downward pulling energy. It's a very interesting factor, the way we try to hide our limitations from God. I remember a particular, I think it was Master's birthday, it was Christmas. It was a very big event at Anandan's. Swamiji was giving a talk. This was very much at the beginning because we were still in the little temple at the seclusion retreat, the one that eventually collapsed and has been replaced by a different one. But that was what we had then, and the whole community fit inside of it. Whatever holiday it was, I was still cooking, so it would have been the first couple of years in the 70s. But Swamiji said, cooking in the retreat kitchen, which meant that I was only partially in the temple. I was listening through the speaker in the kitchen. Swami said, Master is pleased when we give him our successes, but he is more pleased when we give him our failures. And Swami didn't explain that at great length, so I've had to spend a lot of time thinking about it, because struggling against failure or failure thoughts has been a karma I've worked with. But I think it's quite simple because we're ashamed. We're proud of our successes, and it's easy to give them over to God, and it's easy to feel that God has worked through us when it all went well. But to allow our sense of detachment from self-identity to be so complete that if he's responsible for the good things, he must also be responsible for the bad. Otherwise, you see, the ego is still just making decisions. I'm proud of this, so I'll show it to God. But that's not what it means to surrender it to God and to understand that He is the doer. If we can surrender that which we're proud of, but only that which we're proud of is still the operative word. But if we simply know that God is working through us to bring us to freedom, and everything that happens is as it must happen, then we're not ashamed or attached, more attached to our weaknesses. They're just things that happen in the same impersonal way. It's dissolving that whole sense of self that we're working on, not getting ourselves perfected. I used to think that self-realization was just getting everything perfect. That's what it meant, where it's just the opposite. It's ceasing to be identified with whatever happens, just like that. So there has been this great effort to find a way to detach ourselves from our failings, because it's much harder. But now we also have to detach ourselves from all the good things that have flown through us, in the sense of we have to detach ourselves from ourselves. It's impossible, at least let's say it's very difficult, for the ego self even to understand the degree to which we're not here. And it's something that I've only managed to see in glimpses. But one of the ways that we expand more effortlessly is when we do concentrate on all the wonderful things, all the positive, wonderful things that have gone through us, because inherently there's less tension around those issues. It's just when we just think about our times of freedom, our times of joy, they're always times of freedom. And so there's this less of a desire to hide, more of a willingness to be just wide open in what we're doing. I may have mentioned this already, but I was thinking about it again. One of the characteristics of laughter is that while you're actually laughing, you're neither in the past nor the future. It's a very interesting thing to contemplate. It's like, laughter has a unique quality to it. It just takes us over. I don't mean when we're hysterically laughing or completely out of control, but when something just amuses us, it bursts out of us, doesn't it? We don't sort of say, now I will laugh, ha, 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 like that. It's more that it just rises spontaneously and then we're laughing. I had a most peculiar experience once in one of the 8-hour meditations. This again was in the early 70s when I was in the 70s when I was there at Ananda Village, and our Christmas meditation was always led by Swamiji. In the middle of one of the meditations, this almost irresistible desire to laugh out loud came over me. And it was very hard to restrain it. A laugh is a spontaneous experience, and it was exceedingly hard to restrain it. And my mind was so enamored of this desire to laugh that it was actually telling me that if in the middle of this silent meditation, there were like well over 100 people crowded into the temple there, that if I just burst out in merry laughter, just everyone in the room would just laugh happily with me, and then the whole silent meditation would be interrupted by, I guess there is actually, they call laughing yoga. They have such a thing now. I'd never heard of it at the time. And I could just barely tell that idea was completely nuts, and that I really couldn't just burst out laughing. So with great effort, I resisted and sort of made it through the temptation, and then meditation went back to normal. Sometime afterwards, I explained to Swamiji what had happened to me. His answer was, I thought I'd just lost my mind. He said, laughter is a sign of Kundalini. He said it actually does at times manifest that way. It was like, actually, now that I think about it, it's probably the most significant Kundalini experience I've ever had. Probably very close to it. And it's just, it is one of those things, because there is a completely different quality of consciousness when we're laughing. And anyway, that was an observation I had of past and future. We're just in the now, and we're in a state of joy. And that's why the last lines of Master's poem, Samadhi, a tiny bubble of laughter. That's the word he uses. A tiny bubble of laughter. I have become the sea of mirth itself. After all that he's been through in that poem, it comes down to that bubble of laughter. Now, also in that moment of laughter, we detach from everything. You can't, while you're laughing, you can't think, who am I? What am I doing? And if you are, the laughter isn't complete. The laughter is self-conscious. I'm just talking about spontaneous release. I mean, think about how babies and children laugh. Nothing holds them back. They just completely give in to the moment because they're not so ego-identified that they have to hold on. So Swamiji starts telling us, let's just let go of the last things that are holding us. And he says, dwell on the thought of freedom, freedom from all delusion, all desire, and all detachment, and every self-definition. Above all, if you are able to, rid yourself of the thought of any personal, separate identity. You are a ray of God's light. See your little sense of reality becoming absorbed in his infinite bliss. So now I go back again to just, what does that feel like? I mean, what does it feel like to be nothing but his infinite bliss? What does it feel like to be a tiny bubble of laughter? And all of us have experienced it for that split second in which we become a tiny bubble of laughter. So even though for many, many days, we've been talking about this, all this enormous, arduous effort that's required to face and overcome and release and forgive and rise above and accept, just all these different words, but at the end of it, a tiny bubble of laughter. And think about it. See oneself, everything that's holding you. I mean, everything, I don't even want to use the word holding, everything that we think we are. A piece of advice that someone gave me in a letter, it was from, sometimes Divine Mother just hands you something, and it's a complete non sequitur in a sense. It was one of the letters that I get, emails that I get from people that I don't know personally, but because we're together all the time through this medium, they'll communicate with me, which I love, because I do feel that I know people, even if I've never met them. And he was telling me about his spiritual practice, and he was talking about just something that he'd learned from another teacher. What is, and it was 3 questions. What is this feeling? What is it asking of me? Can I let it go? And I just love the simplicity of that. What is this feeling? What is it asking of me? And can I just let it go? So when we're running through all of these things, and once again, these are very deep meditations, words are just like a signpost. It's like we're standing at a crossroads and we're trying to get to this city, and there's a signpost and it says, take this road. So when you use words to try to explain a complete dissolution of everything that we call ourself, it's just the signpost as to what road to take. Swami just says, let go of all these little things. So what causes us to resist? What is this feeling that causes me to resist? What is it asking of me? What does it want? Why do I still hold this? What does it want? Oh, it wants me to be important. It wants me to not forget. It's a false sense of responsibility. If I let go of my identity, what about the people who depend on me? Will they be upset? If I stop thinking about my mother who died so many years ago, will I be betraying my loyalty to her? What is this asking of me? And can I let it go? I mean, what will be lost in just letting go of all of this? What will really be lost? And these are These exercises are profound exercises because they really put us up against what do I really believe is true. There's a wonderful story about Corrie ten Boom, who was a Dutch woman who helped a lot of Jews during the Second World War and ended up in a concentration camp. As a consequence of that, she and her sister and her father ended up running a huge underground rescue from their little house in Amsterdam, I believe. And they hid in their own house 10 or 12 Jewish people that they couldn't find better hiding places for. I say that because they were in a very public place, so it wasn't an ideal people. And they also hid the people who looked the most Semitic, who were therefore the hardest to blend in with the rest of Dutch society. So it was a great danger they were putting themselves in. And they built a false room, a small false room in her bedroom, because the house was a very odd little house, and so there was a place where you could put in a false wall and it wouldn't be obvious, because the Gestapo were very, very smart about these things. The book that she wrote was called The Hiding Place, and that's why it was named, for the hiding place. And in the house, they had constant drills. They would wake everybody up in the middle of the night and see how fast everybody could get into the hiding place, not leaving behind a trace of their presence, because the Gestapo was fond of raiding in the middle of the night. And it may even have been, if I'm not mistaken, that all the Jewish people slept in the hiding place, because the raids would come in the middle of the night, and the practice runs were during the day. But in any case, Corrie said about herself that she slept very deeply and went very deeply into subconsciousness and did not wake up quickly. So when she was woken suddenly from a deep sleep, it took her longer than was going to be safe for her to orient herself. So her young nephew started doing drills on Corrie, which would wake her up from a deep sleep, shouting and flashing lights in her face as if it was the Gestapo, saying, "Where are the Jews? Where are the Jews?" And she would just come out of sleep and say, "Behind the wall in the hiding place." And she would just, point to the side of her bed, because she couldn't grab the reality of the situation fast enough. Of course, that was completely unsatisfactory. So for many nights, her nephew kept training her until it was so deep in her subconscious that she could come out of a dead sleep. They could shout at her, "Where are the Jews?" And she would answer, "What Jews? What are you talking about? Are you crazy?" Now, that image, of course, it has multiple deep meanings from the point of view of heroism and unconditional love and all countless things, because ultimately they were betrayed and went to the concentration camp, and her father and her sister died there. But the part of it that I think about a lot is, if somebody wakes me from a dead sleep and asks, "Are you one with God?" What am I going to say? No, I'm Asha. Can't you see? What do we really believe? Not when we're trying to put on a story, not when we've had time to fix our hair and open our book and look at it carefully and sort of say what's true, but when we're just pressed to, just like that, answer what we have to ask. What comes out of us? What comes out of us? And I, a tiny bubble of laughter, have become the sea of mirth itself. And that's what the final exam is. The final exam, we are being woken up. I don't call it a dead sleep. I'll call it, we're being woken up out of a live sleep. We're being woken up out of a live sleep. And the question is, who do I really think I am? What is this feeling? What does it want from me? This feeling of separateness, this feeling of attachment, that I have to remember this and I have to remember that. Many, many things hold us. I remember, and I've heard this more than once, very profoundly, a woman whose husband died, much beloved husband. It was very sad for her. I was going to say to lose him, but she was funny about that. When people would say to her, "I'm so sorry you lost your husband," she said, "He wasn't a wallet that I left in a department store." She said, "I didn't lose him. I know exactly where he is. He's just not here." It was just like, when you're grief-stricken, you're not as politic as you might be. But it was like, I didn't lose him. He's not lost. He's just gone away. That's quite different. But she did tell me how difficult it became, because now he's been gone for 15 years or more, that as he became less and less important to her everyday life, this deep sense of disloyalty and betrayal began to come over her. And also, and this is classic, if I'm not grieving, I won't have him at all. What is this feeling? What does it want from me? Can I let it go? So when we imagine ourselves actually leaving this world, and we're even thinking of the very happy things that happen to us, the people that we love, the people that we love that love us, can I let them go? Do I have to hold them in their form also? Is that what the apex of love is? Is that we all cling to this temporary manifestation, and I do too? What is this feeling? What does it want from me? Maybe it wants me to transcend. Maybe that's what's required here. None of us, not the people you love either, they're no more those limited forms than you are. Love itself is eternal, but the form constantly shifts. So what does this feeling want from me? It wants me to cling to the form. It wants me to hold myself small. Why would I want to do that? Well, there's countless reasons, and among them is the bird has been in the cage for a really long time. And just because we open the cage door with this great idea that living in the wild is better, it's not necessarily obvious. I think it's pretty nice in here. Food and water are always delivered. There's no predators, however we might think about it. It's familiar. Above all, it's familiar. And we like that. What is this feeling? What does it want from me? Can I let it go? Do I really trust Divine Mother sufficiently to absolutely let go of everything I've known and be certain that she'll be there to catch me? And that is the question, isn't it? First chakra is all about security. Where do we get our security? Do we get our security from being able to predict and to control? I've got it all worked out. I know what my jeopardy is. This is how much threat I'm going to allow, and I'll stand in the middle and I'll keep it together. It's exhausting. And we just do it constantly without even knowing it. The other triple set of questions or suggestions that came to me also in a letter from a friend was very simple. Let go of who you think you are. Let go of where you think you're going. Let go of who you think you've been. That last one is really an interesting one. Let go of who you think you've been. It's been a great show. But if you think of it like an actor on a stage, if after the show is over and the curtain has come down, you refuse to take off your costume and you keep talking in that funny accent that you developed for the part, anybody looking at you would think that you were a little crazy. But nobody on this plane of consciousness thinks we're crazy for just continually affirming this personality and asserting it and explaining things. Well, I've always been this way from a child, from a very young age. This is the way I've always been. This is how I was raised. This is just who I am. Really? Is that so? I hear myself saying the same things. I'm not blaming you. But why? It's just, you just have to turn the whole thing upside down. Why? So there we are at the end of our life. It's all been just beautiful, or it's been terrible. But whatever it is, it doesn't even exist anymore, except that we're holding on to it. Why are we holding on to it? Think of the freedom of laughter. Just think of the freedom of laughter. And that story I told at the beginning of this whole cycle about Dr. Ritchie standing with Jesus, trying to, with his physical body, block Jesus's view of the 360-degree movie of Ritchie's life, which was not attractive, and just trying to hide from Jesus the things that Ritchie himself was not proud of. And Jesus was not judgmental. He thought it was funny. Richie said, the Savior, in his southern accent, the Savior was amused. And so that's ultimately, in the most interesting way, given the way Master ended his samadhi poem, in the most interesting way, that's what we should try on ourselves. When we feel ourselves being so attached and so afraid and so whatever defined by, just God finds it amusing. And when someone finds you amusing and just laughing with you, but not at you, but with you, isn't it just a great sense of freedom to be able to be like that? I had this dream, and this was a dream where my subconscious really was my friend. And a lot of you have heard me say it, but it's very apt. In this weird dream, I was going to be decapitated, in the most like medieval sort of way, just putting my head on a chopping block and having someone with both hands lift one of those battle axes and just bring it down on my neck. And the person who was about to chop my head off was a friend of mine, very nice man. And it was just sort of understood that, well, it was time for me to have my head chopped off, and he was the one who was going to do it. And there was no animosity. Oh, yeah, this time for have my head chopped off. I was just literally, I had to kneel down and just set my head on the block like that. And it was all just quite cheerful. And there was no one else there. We were like on this huge empty stage, is what it felt like. And so I put my head down like this, and he was raising up the battle axe. And just for a second, the concept of pain entered my thought. Ooh, this could hurt, just like that. Then I remembered Master's promise that, it is Master's promise. Master says, if you're martyred with faith, you don't feel any pain. I wasn't being martyred, but I also remembered what he said, that when the soul sees that the body is about to have a very bad experience, it will just withdraw because there's no point in being there. It might as well leave just before the point of impact. So just as the battle axe is coming down, I exited. I just left. And I was floating up above it all. And this voice, my own voice in my dream, said, bye-bye, Asha. Just like that. I woke up. I was so happy when I woke up, not because I wasn't dead, but because in that moment, that had been my response. And I cling to that. And I encourage you to cling to something similar. Just imagine that suddenly you're going to be decapitated. Suddenly you're in a car and you see the moment of impact. You're in a plane and you know it's going down. You've gotten caught on the weeds and you see that you're going to drown. And just, what is this feeling? And can I let it go? There's a story in a collection of stories that I published called Loved and Protected, Stories of Miracles and Answered Prayers. Highly recommended. It's wonderful stories. There's also, I did an audio book of it, which you can find somewhere. I've reread all those stories multiple times because they're so good. And one of them is Devarshi. And Devarshi got caught in a riptide and was absolutely exhausted and really thought he was going to die. And when he just realized he was never going to get back to shore, there was nothing he could do. I love the way he put it. He said he went belly up, which literally meant he lay on his back and turned his belly up, surrendered to the fact that he was going to die. And he described it this way. He said, giving up his body felt like returning a library book that he'd finished reading back to the library. I mean, is there any sense of charge on that? Oh, this was such a good book. I had such a good time. And now I turn it back in. Isn't that wonderful? Bye-bye, whoever you are. I'm still fine, but it's over. I've read the story. It was glorious. Now it's done. That's what it is to pass the final exam. And let us all pass with flying colors. Now, of course, Devarshi is still with us. So the end of that story was he completely relaxed and then suddenly found himself in still water and able to swim back to the shore. But he had to go all the way to there and discover, well, it was just borrowed in the first place. It was never mine. And now the time is up. a tiny bubble of laughter, I have become the sea of mirth itself. Joy to you.